So let me introduce you to Mr. Rob Stone. So Rob is the founder of Instaloft, which is the UK's largest loftboarding, loft solutions company. He's got several other companies to his name as well, but Instaloft, he scaled that company. He'd only started it, I think, the year before, and he was at low six-figure revenues at the time and kind of break even. And over the next couple of years, he scaled that company into 8-figure revenues and 7-figure profits. He's not just built it, he's managed to keep it there, and he's bought and built other companies simultaneously. And but it's not all been plain sailing. Last year, he had a personal tragedy which is unimaginable. And I know that mental health is kind of an en vogue topic these days, but I've had a few personal experiences via clients and family members of significant mental health crises, so I felt like it was a topic to lean into rather than avoid, especially for business owners right now who are under a lot of pressure in a lot of cases, and it causes a lot of stress and ongoing impact into marriages, into families. So this conversation, well, I've got no idea where it's going to go, but I feel like this is a man that we can learn a lot from business-wise, but I also asked him to share his tale because I feel what he's done in rebuilding from this tragedy has been, on both a personal level and a business level, has been wonderful.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you for having me here. This is going to be, and even now I can feel myself feeling emotional, so please bear with me. If I get choked up, I'll take a second. I started this thing by saying that I really don't know how I'm here today, how I'm still standing here in front of you. I've no idea how I got here or how I got through, well, the entire journey in a lot of ways. From when I started the business to now, there's been a lot of challenges, but especially over the last sort of 12, 18 months. But somehow I am still here. I'm still standing and I'm still showing up. Take a breather from that for a second, and I'll take you back to 2014 when it all started. And if I can talk about it, I'll talk about a part of the story that people don't always hear. It'd been a challenging time. I had a business that was a sales and marketing business, and I, not knowing much about business at the time, I didn't have the right contracts in place and things like this, so I effectively lost my sales team to the supplier, and I ended up in debt for something like £65,000 to the VAT man, and it was quite a challenging time, and I remember trying all sorts of things. My wife and I parted ways at that point, and she basically kicked me out, and it turned out she was seeing somebody else, and I moved out with one of my sons, and I had no money coming in. My business had failed. I had the VAT man after me for a lot of money, and I had no money, no job. You know, I was applying for jobs left, right, and centre. Couldn't get one. I was either overqualified or not qualified enough. I think we've all been there to some degree in our careers. And I remember sitting on my living room floor, crying my eyes out, not knowing what I'm going to do. A neighbour had just given me £10 to buy some bread for my son because I hadn't got any money to feed him. And I couldn't get benefits because I'd allegedly earned too much in the year before. But you know, it's like you earn the money, you spend it. Certainly did in those days. And I had other children. You know, my wife and I had 9 children between us, so this wasn't an easy thing to do. I had one son living with me, and the rest still wanted, obviously, maintenance money, which I was trying to provide. So those of you who will be familiar with the story, that I was doing car boot sales. I had quite an extensive DVD collection, and I was selling those for £1 each on a car boot just to try and make ends meet, and it wasn't really working, if I'll be honest. And I'd been, the company that I had lost, effectively, was in loft installation. So do you remember when people were doing the loft installation grants and that sort of thing? So it's an industry I knew quite well. And I sat there one day, I've been trying to do all sorts of things. I had this great idea to set up a sex toy website, which actually would have been great if I knew how to set a website up, because, and I say this because, you know, a few months later, 50 Shades of Grey came out.
Okay.
And that industry went massive as a result of it. So that was a little thing I missed, unfortunately, but maybe that's just as well. Anyway, I had this idea to look at the loft installation again, and I realised one of the objections we faced all the time was people didn't want their insulation because they didn't want to stop using their loft for storage. So I started looking into that and how could I get around that, and traditional loftboarding probably wasn't going to work because it's a big no-no in the industry. And I discovered
that's because the loftboarding squashes the insulation,
or
so
means they don't have any insulation, you know, which obviously contributes then to your energy losses and stuff. I found a company called Loftzone that had developed this patented raised floor system, which raises the floor about 30 centimetres off the joists and protects the insulation underneath it. So not only can you have your full insulation, but it protects it from being squashed or damaged, and you can use your loft as you want to. So it seemed a great idea. I thought about it a bit more. I'm not a DIY person. I spent half my life sat behind a desk, so you can imagine me trying to use a saw. I could cut a very diagonal line, which, well, I say diagonal, it was more like that, but I thought, well, it's an idea, and I'm sure I can make it work. So I created a Facebook page. I got some photographs from Loftstone. I think they allowed me to use some of their photographs initially, and I started sort of posting all the local buy, sell, swap groups and things like that, saying, oh, we're amazing, we can do this. And I contacted Loftstone and said, will they supply me? And they said, well, yes, this is how much it's going to cost you. And I said, well, I haven't got any money. And they're like, well, sorry, we can't send you the stuff without it. And then they phoned me up and said, we actually have got a lead for you if you want to try and do it. So I thought, well, yeah, I'll give it a go. So I went out there and did a quote. And much to my surprise, I think even now, I think that was quite an expensive quote that we did back then. But the woman said yes. So I phoned her up and said, yeah, she's agreed to go ahead. And they said, great, so do you want to put an order in? Well, I can't. I told you I haven't got any money. And they said, well, I said, well, what about you send me the stuff I need for this job, and I'll pay you when the woman pays me. And for some weird reason, they actually agreed to do that. And so, but I still need tools. So I applied for there was an advert on the TV for somebody with bad credit. So it was, you get a credit card if you got a bad credit history, and I'd always had a spotless one up until this time in my life. So I applied for it, and they gave me one with £200 on, which wasn't a lot. But with that, I bought a handsaw and an electric screwdriver, which it was one of these mini screwdrivers. It was probably the stupidest thing I ever bought, really, because it took me hours to do the jobs. But I got out there, I did the job, I paid Loftstone, and I carried on doing the buy, sell, swap type things, getting the jobs in. And it worked, to be honest with you. There was no expensive marketing. It was all done on the buy, sell, swap groups and some by word of mouth. And we were hitting a market that no one else had hit because we were protected insulation. We could do a lot of work in new builds, which you can't do. Well, people do, but you're not supposed to do with the old-fashioned systems. So I started doing it, and it started to really take off. A lot of people laughed at me because, like I said, I wasn't a DIY person. I remember paying a guy £450 to come and show me how to build a loft hatch because somebody asked me to do a loft hatch enlargement, and I remember watching him like a hawk because I thought I don't want to pay him 450 quid again, So I watched how to do it, and I figured that out afterwards as well. And I really winged it probably for the first few months. During this period, my wife and I sort of rekindled things. Took some persuading. At that point is when I actually asked her to marry me. And maybe that was the right thing to do, maybe it wasn't, who knows. But like I said, I went out there, I did it all, and really that's when Instaloft was born.
And this was what, 2014,
2014, yeah. So the first job was September 2014. And then slowly, momentum sort of built up, and the money started coming in. I mean, we're not talking, I was doing maybe 2 or 3 jobs a week, but when you're making £400 or £500 profit on each one, that's quite, to go from nothing to making that kind of money on the jobs is quite good. So wife and I rekindled things, we moved back in, we agreed to get married, everything was going really well, and then lo and behold, I fell down somebody's stairs. So that was a bit of a turning point in a lot of ways. In fact, part of the journey is about the accidental turning points that we face while we're doing things. And so I was at a customer's house doing a quote, and I was talking about the loft hatch and what we were going to do, how we were going to move it around. As I was talking, I stepped backwards and went straight down the stairs, and I sprained both my wrists. And at this point, it was only me. So I had two of my wrists in splints because I couldn't do anything. And I had already quite a few customers booked up waiting to be served. So I had no choice either. I go back to square one, where I don't serve the customers, I've got no income coming in again, because we're still living hand to mouth at this point. And so I put an advert on Facebook just saying, does anyone know a carpenter that might want to come and do some work for me? And I talked to a guy, and he was very rough and ready. Do you remember Scotty?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about him perhaps a bit afterwards. So Scotty came and joined us, and originally he offered to do it for £80 a day, which was great. After the first job, he refused to do it for £80 a day, which is understandable. But he came along and he became my first employee. And I think from that, I realised that because he was going and doing the work, I could then carry on doing more quotes. So it got me to spend a bit more time on the marketing, going out and doing more quotes. And from then on, it was smooth sailing, wasn't it? No, maybe not. As I say, I fell down some of the stairs, that forced my hand. But from that downwards, instead of doing sort of 2 to 3 installs a week, I was doing 5 a week. So we never had it. One of the worries was, would I be able to give him enough work? Because 2 or 3 jobs a week, if he's taking that chunk of money as well, I'm going to be lower on income. And I think you do, when you take on your employees, you have to balance that. Is you can actually get more work from them than you can produce on your own. And that was the key that worked there. Chugged along. I think by the end of the first year, I'd done 125,000, which felt like an awful lot of money, but I didn't make an awful lot of profit. I probably had a bit of it in my pocket, if I'll be honest. Back in those days, I remember on paper, I'd made 12.5 grand in profit that year. In reality, I probably spent 50 grand of it on God knows what. But you don't know what you don't know, which I've said that. I don't know if that's one of your sayings or one of mine, but I've been saying it for years. But I still had no money in the bank. I just thought I had a great business. And I remember approaching Dan. I think I applied through one of your web forms, didn't I? And came and had a meeting with you, didn't I? And I remember you saying to me, we don't really take on businesses your size. But you must have seen some reason to bring me in. So I came and sat in this thing and started working really hard. And one of the first bits of advice they gave me was to stop doing these 15% discounts, because I still had no money. And one of my sales techniques was to say, oh, well, if you go ahead today, I can give you 15% off, which worked, or at least in my head it worked. It was my tool, so to speak. And one of the first pieces of advice I said that I was given was to stop doing that. And so I was really nervous, and I did. I thought, well, I'll do it not tomorrow, but then the next day I'll do my normal thing and we'll just do it slowly. But what I found was when I went out, it didn't change anything. People were still buying off me without the discounts. And that was quite a strong learning curve, because suddenly my income, so to speak, went up by 15%.
And that was all that went on the bottom line, right?
Exactly, yeah, I was 15% better off.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the margins that Rob had at that time, that's actually double his profit.
Yeah, exactly. People kept buying, and it was great, and I was getting more and more. Because momentum was building, we were getting recommendations as well. It got to the point where people were waiting 3 or 4 weeks to get a quote. And if you remember me taking on my first salesperson, it was a real big debate about, how much do you pay a salesperson? So a guy came to quote me for building a new orangery on our house, and I actually quite liked the way he was selling. So I asked him if he wanted the job, and he told me where to go in no uncertain terms. He was a traditional window door salesperson, but a nice one. But I planted the seed with him, and after Christmas in the January, I think it must have been 2017, he came to me and said, actually, I would like to give it a try. So I took on my first salesperson. It worked. He was able to go out and sell, which meant, again, that I could spend more time on the business, generating. I spent a lot of time on marketing. It became my thing, really, and understanding the financials. And I became a real whiz at the financials, so much so that by the time we put our third van on, Dad would give me a challenge, if you remember this one. We were sat in the room. It was quite a small room, so I don't know whether there was about 8 of us in the group at that point.
Yeah,
so
it
was it like the boardroom thing that you did?
Yeah, it was a boardroom meeting, yeah.
And I'm feeling really confident because I've got this business, and I've got a salesperson, and I've got these 3 vans on the road, and Dan says to me, right, you've got a challenge to, how much money have you got in the bank? And I had none, really. Yep. He said, right, I want you to save £30,000 by the end of the next quarter. And I was like, all right, I can do that. And I did. I remember coming in and saying, I've done it, I've got the 30 grand, I didn't save a penny more, bear in mind,
I was going to say, if I wanted to be really picky, I'd say, if I remember, Rob, it was 29,870 quid or something like that.
It was as close as damned. And I was quite chuffed and felt quite proud of myself. By this time, I think ego tells you you've got a fantastic business because you've got 30 grand in the bank, and from having none, it's quite a big difference.
By the way, can I just add a thing in here, just for everybody knows? It's always relative to where you're at.
Yeah.
But I'd already observed in Rob this kind of like, we'll make the sales and then immediately the money would get spent on a good idea. And so the 30 grand was very specific, because I figured with the money he was making, if I could just stop him from testing out new ideas immediately because he had spare cash, he would accrue 30 grand. So I was very specific with that number and that challenge, and I could see that he was competitive, like most of us are, that challenge caused him to just kind of keep an eye on that metric. So he'd come back with 30 grand, and I thought, in my head now, I'm going, I've cracked this now. And so Rob tells the next part of the story.
Yeah. So as Dan said, he thought he cracked it, and I thought I was rich. And I put on the third van. That's what I put on the third van, because I thought, well, if 2 vans can make me this much, I can keep growing and keep growing. So I put on the third van, and then at the end of the next quarter, I came back with a tail between the legs, because I think I'd lost the entire 30 grand on unnecessary expenses, and I couldn't work out why, I don't think. Kev and I sat down and we went through what actually makes a van profitable, what works, what doesn't work. And at that point, we sort of knew then what we needed to do. So we got rid of the third van because it wasn't profitable. And I think that the next quarter was about regrouping almost and regaining that sort of money. But it's probably one of the best sessions I've ever had. Thanks, Kev. Because that gave me a lot more insight into actually what I need to see when I'm looking at a P&L and looking at breaking it down to an individual van to actually make the money.
Yeah, can I just throw in another thought? Because again, sometimes we lose sight. Because what Rob had, first of all, he said it, but he didn't really emphasise it. Falling down the stairs was the best thing that happened to him because it forced him to do the hire, which otherwise he might have been more tempted to keep the money himself. So there was a reinvestment required. However, the third van, the reason why I think Kevin and I were apprehensive at first is because we didn't feel that Rob was ready, i.e. having the cash reserves, but also clarity about what success looked like. And that's the session. But he already had the idea in his head to say, well, if I can replicate in this area, if I can replicate it in other areas or more vans or just more vans in the same area, then all of a sudden now we've got the ability to multiply the money coming in and it's not dependent upon Rob. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember coming to the session and saying, right, I want to put a third van on again. And everyone was like, don't do it. You're not ready, don't do it. But I'm never very good at taking advice. Listening, yeah. So I thought, sod it, I'm going to do it. But this time I was armed with the knowledge that Kevin had given me. And actually it worked. And I put a third van on and then a fourth van on. And we were growing quite quickly at this point. And my daughter became a salesperson because, again, we needed another salesperson and she asked if she could do it. And I was really reticent because I'm really sexist and I thought, how can a girl go and sell loftboarding? It seemed like a strange thing for her to do. But she's my daughter and she's a very clever girl. So I thought, well, why not? And she went out there and proved me completely wrong. All right, because I knew it was the right thing to give her the job. So, and she did, and she still works for us today, which is lovely. Then Loftstone called me up the one day and said, "Oh, we've got no coverage in the Reading area. Would you mind doing some work there?" And I looked at it, and it's like,
and you're in Telford.
Yep.
Telford, yeah.
So that's a good 2 hours drive really for a van, and you've got guys on a van. If they're going to spend 4 hours in a van, it's not really going to work. So we looked at the area, and I thought, well, if we can locate in such a spot that we can actually get stock over to there, maybe once a week, then actually this could work. So we set about getting some premises set up, and I think a week before we were due to start working these premises, the whole thing fell down. The landlord pulled out, and we were stuck with jobs. We'd already employed a salesperson. We got jobs lined up. We had staff ready to start, and we had nowhere to work from. So we ended up hiring some shipping containers in a field with a goat. Which was very...
The goat was thrown in.
Yeah, the goat was thrown in, but it was free. And the goat was a godsend because it ate all the rubbish. So it was great. So we operated from that depot probably for 2 or 3 years, I think we had about 5 or 6 shipping containers by the end of it. And it was...
Well, it was great. I remember again, it's funny, another thing where it went wrong, as in the landlord pulled out, but then it ended up being a blessing. Because, what was the saving on shipping containers? Because, again, the guys are just getting the stock, basically. They're getting the stock and then going to the people's houses to do the offboarding. So they didn't need an office, and the savings were massive.
Yeah, I mean, you think down there, I think our unit now is probably 80 grand a year, where we were paying 8 grand a week per shipping container or something stupid. So it was crazy. And we still got some shipping containers in a couple of places, but it's frowned upon by a lot of the guys now. I'm a big believer in it because it helped me back in the early days. It's great for going into a new area where you don't necessarily need a physical premises all day long. So we got that going, and I carried on focusing, coming to the sessions, learning about forecasts and cash flow and P&Ls and all the boring stuff that we don't think we need to know. But if I hadn't done it, I don't think we'd have carried on growing the way we did. One of the key lessons which Dan will probably have told you many, many times is provide value, not discounts. And it's one thing I'm always talking to my sales team about now is look, when you're going out there, we've got a lot of competitors now that are doing it for peanuts effectively because they're just trying to survive, similar to how I was back in the day. So we've got to build value because we're a lot more expensive, so we've got to explain all the reasons why they should use us. But yeah, so providing the value is really good.
In many respects, you fueled your own competition.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just directly copied.
Yeah, a lot of people sort of coming into the marketplace. One of our competitors in Milton Keynes was a customer we let down. And now he's quite a big installer, although he does Loftstone, so it's not completely lost for me. So we opened up Reading, then we opened up Peterborough because my daughter's now husband moved his RAF, he was in the RAF, so he moved to Peterborough to be stationed there and she moved with him. And we thought, well, let's set up a depot there and we can do all of that area. And then we did Yorkshire because we had a blueprint suddenly of how to, well, in those days we thought this is how to do it. And we ended up going up to, I think it was 6 depots at the time. when we and at that point we'd got up to six figures, and it was pretty good going, to be honest with you. And then there was a session here the one time, and you were talking about a guy, I think it was a pharmaceutical company, where he bought his supplier. And we talked about the reasons why, because if the supplier suddenly goes bust or something, you've got a big problem. And I thought, that's an interesting point. So I approached Loftzone, who were the manufacturer I was using, and I said to them, I would like to buy the business or buy into it or something. And they were, first of all, the first guy I approached just told me, no, it's not for sale, never going to happen. And I thought, there must be another way to do this. But there were 5 directors. And I thought, well, just because he doesn't want to sell, doesn't mean the others don't want to. So very carefully, I approached the other ones, and 3 of them wanted to sell. So we hindsight's a great thing, isn't it? So this is where things go right and wrong at the same time. I'd agreed initially to buy, I think it was 78%, which are the 3 directors plus one. There were 4 directors actually that were going to sell. There was only one that didn't want to. So we arranged all the funding with it. Lloyds Bank were very helpful in doing that, but they wanted a debenture. And the other directors refused to allow the debenture, the ones that were staying. One was staying with quite a big share, one with a very small share, but they refused the debenture. So I had to go back to Lloyds and say, I'm sorry, that the deal's off because they won't accept the debenture. So during that time, we restructured the deal, so I ended up buying a third of the business, and the other 2 put some money in as well, and we bought the 3 directors out. Frustratingly, Lloyds Bank phoned up about a week after that deal was done to say, actually, we've changed our mind about the debenture, you can have it. And had I bought 78% of that business, things would have been a very different picture now. But that's still a work in progress. So
if you don't think this is relevant for you, it is, because what Rob just described was he'd come to a session, I'd given an example of an acquisition, but a single point of failure called a single supplier for Rob, and if he fell out with this supplier, it was going to cause massive problem, a problem that could probably cause the business to fail. Rob doesn't take a no for an answer. So the fact that he went to one director, didn't get the answer that he wanted, he worked down the list of directors and then got them on board. And then when the bank basically kiboshed the deal, he still found another way to do it, even though it didn't take the exact form that he wanted.
Yeah.
So there's lessons there for you where something you've got a problem or a weakness in your business, but there's actually just perhaps flexibility about the way to go about doing it.
I think at the time we paid 350 grand because it was well overvalued, if you remember.
Well, I remember you and I having a big fallout because Rob was keen on this deal, and I felt it was, I won't use the words I used at the time, but I felt it was overpriced.
Yeah, and it was, in fairness. I don't think it's worth much more than that now, to be honest with you, in my head, but they still disagree. I don't want to get ahead of you because I guess you're going to get there, but yeah.
I'm happy to say that I was wrong. So even though Rob's saying he overpaid and it's not worth much more than that now for his share in this company, at the same time, Rob had the wherewithal, and I was perhaps too cheap to go looking at it just financially. Didn't work. I'm pretty certain I told Rob, don't do this. I'm strongly against it. Yep. And he did it anyway, and a few years later turned out to be a saving grace for the company.
Well, yeah, in a couple of different ways. But first of all, I mean, it paid itself back within 18 months, I think. The money in dividends that we received back were greater than what we paid for it. So it paid itself back very, very quickly. And like with all things, you're stuck with I'm working with 2 directors that perhaps have a different view on how to run things than I would have done. And that's an ongoing story, one which will develop probably over the next 18 months again. But like I said, we had our blueprint, we had our supply chain nailed into place, and things were going really, really, really well. And then in 2019, my wife and I decided we were going to buy what was going to be our dream home, purely by accident.
So where were your revenues and profits of Instaloft at this point?
About 10 million, I think, 10, 12 million, something along those lines. So we were doing quite well. We were comfortably off. So we went to have a look at a house.
What was the margin, just for context? Because again, if in 2014 you were at 6 figures, it wasn't a straight line, but it was every year. Every year there was significant growth.
Higher. Yeah. Margins, though, I think we made £1 million profit by then.
I've got a feeling that was the first year that there was 7 figures on the bottom line.
I think it was, yeah. And I remember my accountant saying to me, congratulations, you're now a millionaire, and thinking, well, where the hell is it all? Because the reality is, while you look good on paper, it doesn't always transpond to your bank account. But as I say, we'd spotted this house. In actual fact, I'd spotted a different house, and I booked to go and view it. And when I turned up, I'd booked the wrong house. So we drove further down the road and went to this other place. And even though it needed a lot of work doing, it's one of these places, when you go in, you fall in love and you can see the potential for it. So we bought that place and we moved in December the 15th, and there was a lot of work, a lot of money needed to be spent on it. We gutted the kitchen. We had Christmas out of a steamer because we had no kitchen. We'd actually knocked the kitchen out. So we started work on that, and then I don't know if you'll remember, but COVID hit a few months later, didn't it? And so we suddenly got this house with you know, there was a shell of a place really because we destroyed a lot of it. You know, the news were telling everyone they had to close their businesses down, and we were in a panic state because, you know, we'd taken on a mortgage to buy this place, as you can imagine, and we didn't know what we were going to do. And I'm on the phone to people and to yourself and other people saying, do you remember me talking about that in January? And I said to you, this COVID thing could be quite serious, this thing that's going on in China. And everyone's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Not necessarily you, but people were saying, it's not going to get here. Don't worry about it. And so I started having some ideas in my head about what would happen if it did.
Because, I mean, what was your payroll at that point?
Ooh.
So on 10 million revenue, the payroll was what?
God knows, it was probably 250 grand a month or something silly.
Yeah, I was going to say 3 or 4 million, yeah,
if not more. It's about 30.
You think your payroll was bad?
Yeah, it's about 33% overall now. So we had COVID. We had everyone suddenly furloughed, no money coming in. We were desperately trying to ring people who hadn't paid to try and get the money in off them, but people were edging their bets thinking they didn't have to pay anything. So it was quite a tough time. And I started putting a plan together really to how can we bring people back into work. And everyone was fighting against me, the staff, my wife, you name it, saying you can't do that, it's irresponsible. People on the mastermind group were saying it's irresponsible to even think about it. And I'm like, well, when I heard what the government said, they said companies that need to shut down and only the essential workers for the business. But the news was saying, no, everyone's got to close down. And essential workers became ambulance people, doctors, nurses, those kind of people. I kept thinking, but they didn't say that. But no one else was taking a notice. And in the end, I wrote to several MPs and said, look, this is what was said. So, but the news has told everyone to close their businesses down, but that's not what the government said. And eventually, 2 or 3 of them came back to me and said, well, yeah, we didn't tell everyone to close their companies down. We told only essential workers should be working in the environments. So if people can still work, they should still work.
Rob was very vocal, and as you can tell, he doesn't mind making his opinion known. and my experience of Rob is he can admit when he's wrong. You can tell that Rob's not afraid to look at different ways to solve the problem, hence writing to his MPs.
Yeah. The MPs confirmed it, so I then drafted an email to all my staff, or a message to all my staff saying, look, here's the written proof that we didn't have to close down. What we do have to do is put in place safe working practices. So we need to make sure that we do that effectively. So we're looking for volunteers, first of all, to come back. And this was maybe middle of April by this time, so we've been shut down completely for 3 or 4 weeks.
Right, there wasn't furlough yet either, so you were just burning cash.
Yeah, we were just burning cash, yeah. So we paid out March. March was a massive loss. We'd gone from making almost more money every single month after month after month, to that March where we suddenly, I think we'd had a 60 grand loss, which was, you know, nothing compared to last year. But
first loss
ever, that's right. But I think we had 5 guys agreed to come back to work, and we developed safe working practices, so things like washing all the equipment down, making sure customers were out of the house when we were doing the work, all these sort of things. They'd open the door, leave the door open, move into another room. The guys would clean all the surfaces on the way up the stairs, do the work in the loft where no one's been in there, and then clean it all back on the way out. And we did that, and it started to work. You know, obviously it's not enough to pay the bills, but then we decided, I think after about 3 or 4 weeks of that, we decided then to bring all of the head fitters back. Some people never came back; they refused to. The majority did, I think. And so by May, we were back, I think, fully staffed for the most part. And from memory, June was our best month ever. And at that point, marketing became pence for leads because everyone was at home, so they were seeing the adverts, and that year really transformed the business in terms of it was without a doubt our best year in terms of both revenue, profit, customer generation, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, because especially in this industry, a lot of the focus on home stuff meant that the marketing costs, there's much more demand. And also there was the advantage in hindsight, I suspect we wouldn't have chosen for it to be this way, but the advantage was there was a lot of money sloshed into the system. So a lot of us had big spikes in sales, but in the home improvement industry more than most, right? And you could also control your costs because you could adjust the furlough upwards and downwards, if you remember, accordingly to what the business needed.
Yeah. And it was good. And the office staff were all working from home, so there was no sort of big office. It was really strange going into an office there's a lot of people working, but no one's in the building. At this point, my wife decided it was time to maybe start to think about stepping back a little bit. So I went out there.
You stepping back?
Yeah, or both, mainly me, because she was working in it ad hoc. And so I decided to try and hire my first MD, which would allow me to step back. And I remember finding somebody that on paper seemed like she was absolutely fantastic. She came from a very big home improvements company, and I thought, yep, this is the woman that's going to lead this company to the future. And she talked a big talk. Do you remember she came to some of the sessions here? And I remember the complaints afterwards. They were far worse than the complaints you get about me, I can tell you. Does anyone remember that person?
Yes.
Yeah, there were a few. Anyway, she came in and she didn't really understand the business at all. She certainly didn't understand the people or the culture we built, because at this point, the whole team was like a family. You know, we were all really close. We all had the same vision to achieve. But she came in and was trying to make it her own thing. So she was trying to get rid of people and replace them with her own. And she really caused a lot of damage. We had some sort of real good people leave during that time because she railroaded them out. She also had a bit of an attack on Pam. I don't know if you remember, there was a thing where we'd invited her around for a meal to try and bond with her a bit more and get her to understand things. And she just started attacking Pam and being horrible about her, saying she was interfering.
Pam being Rob's wife.
Yeah.
For those that don't know.
Sorry, yeah. And so that was a real tough time. I remember me getting really emotional about it. I remember you saying, you've got to get rid of this woman. So I was trying to do that. But then what was also going on at the same time is that my dad was very poorly, Pam's dad was very poorly, and within the space of 3 months we've lost, while this woman's doing what she's doing, Pam lost her dad and I lost my dad. In a lot of ways, that year was a very, very, very pivotal. I know now, if I can say this without getting choked up, it was a more pivotal year than any other year throughout the entire business, and not in a nice way, I think is the best way to describe it. That really started some things unravelling, because when my wife's dad died, she never really quite got over it, and she decided that was the time to step back completely. She wanted to not work again. Life was too short, you know, we've got to start living, all those sort of things. And in hindsight, there's no doubt about that. That's what we all dream of, isn't it? Is being able to step away and just enjoy our lives. And she wanted me to do the same thing.
Because you've had multiple years now of 7-figure profits at this point.
Yeah.
So now the cash really has started to accrue, and you picked it up between the lines. So to give Rob credit, he'd never, in relative terms, he'd never spent on flash, fancy things. I mean, he bought a very nice house, but he wasn't extravagant with his spending. He was actually reinvesting in stuff that would help the company grow. So he bought buildings, etc., etc., etc. So there's still cash is
Well, I bought that,
building
and I paid the mortgage off as well during that COVID year. So we hadn't got a mortgage, so in theory we could have stepped back quite easily, and had things panned out, it would have done. And perhaps if I had, the next few years would have been very, very different. I removed the MD, and because of that I had to step right back into the business, and I was right in the thick of it, trying to turn it around, because we'd got some significant, we hadn't got losses, what we got was significant. So we'd gone from making 150 to 200 grand a month down to 30, 40, 60, you know, that kind of figures, with different things. And during this time, my wife is spending more and more time at home, not doing an awful lot, to be honest with you. Probably sat there, I will say rotting, I think is probably the best way to describe it, mentally rotting. The dream that we'd built, you know, the reason I'd done everything I'd done was falling apart, and I didn't even know, you know, to be honest, because I was so thick in the business trying to get it back on track.
Right, because by the way, some people flippantly might say, oh yeah, poor you, Rob, you've gone from 150 grand profit to 40 grand profit a month. And while it's true to say that level of profit is beyond most people's wildest imagination, even 40 grand a month is beyond most people's wildest imagination. At the same time, relatively, imagine if whatever your profits, whatever your income is, was cut by 75%. It's like, it's dramatic, whopping.
It is, it's significant. But I stepped back in, I turned the company back round again, we got back up to the same sort of figures, and, you know, with Pam's, you know, insistence, we decided to try again. This time I went through a big recruitment agency, and they narrowed it down to a guy that had built and sold a business with multiple vans in multiple locations. Again, on paper, he seemed like he'd be absolutely perfect, and he seemed like a really nice guy. Everyone in the company seemed to really like him. He got on well with everyone. And, you know, that whole thing, you don't always see what you don't see. You don't know what you don't know. He came in, I spent a lot of time working with him. We got a new marketing person in as well, and he and she did not get on very well. He didn't lead from the front. You know, whereas I'm, as you said before, I'm not afraid to speak my mind. I'm not afraid to just challenge what everyone's thinking. If we're sitting in a boardroom and you all have an idea, whether I agree with your idea or not, I'm going to say something completely different. You know, you might remember that in some of the sessions. I like to make sure that you've thought through what you're thinking about and you've not just said it randomly. Because if you've got to a process to get to that point, then I understand that you've thought it through. But if you haven't, and you've just come up with an idea, that you've got to understand the pitfalls. So I'm always looking at what can go wrong, not just what can go right. So this guy didn't do any of that. And he got involved in all sorts of bickering and disputes, and I found out since that he was undermining my authority an awful lot. So instead of doing the things that I was telling him he needed to do to make the business work, he was going around afterwards saying to people, just ignore him, you know, do what I say, you know. So
we're going to get to the lessons, but by the way, the one thing I want to point out, Rob did a fair recruiting process with the first MD hire, the woman, and then he was more diligent and it was a lot more expensive, if memory serves me correctly, for the kind of headhunter or the recruitment firm that he used for the second hire, the gentleman, and yet still there's a problem. And there's some lessons here that are coming, but it's kind of like you can seemingly do everything right or feel like you made progress, but that doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a good outcome.
And in fairness, the guy could talk the talk, so when you're in a meeting with him, he seemed to be on top of everything, I just didn't know what was going on in the background when I wasn't there.
Yeah, at the surface, it would seem, at first glance, it would seem like he was a much better fit than his predecessor, definitely.
Yeah, and I was sat there with him most days, trying to coach him and help him, and the same with the marketing manager as well. Spent a lot of time with her, and this whole time, my wife is, I'm fighting for the business. My wife is fighting something else entirely, but something that I couldn't see and no one else saw. To be honest with you, she was struggling both mentally and emotionally. We were on holiday. We went to the Maldives, which was our dream holiday, and before we went, she said to me something along the lines of, "Make no mistake, this holiday is a make or break." And I couldn't understand what was going on, because what do you mean make or break? In theory, there was no problem in our relationship. So we went there, and then while I was there, we took on Ben Crouch, the FD, and he sent me an email basically saying it was the end of February, and that was the first month where we had a significant loss. I think we'd lost 80 grand or something like that. And he was saying to me that there's drastic action needs to be taken. If we don't do it, there's going to be a lot of big problems. And basically, I'd let the company go into almost like a shambles, And a lot had been going on over those few months, because Pam had become quite reclusive in some ways. It's strange. She'd become quite reclusive, but also she was going out drinking an awful lot. But she started making weird accusations. All sorts of things were going on. So I was battling her at home, this at work, not really understanding what on earth's going on. We got this email, and it knocked me about a bit, because we'd gone from, worked hard to pull it back to where it was, to suddenly get an email off your FD to say basically we're screwed. And when I read that email, I was quite upset about it, as you can imagine. You think, you mentioned being sat on the beach.
So what year were we here now?
This was last year.
Right, so last year.
February last year.
So revenues at this point?
25 million-ish.
Yeah. And obviously, you'd come back in before you were profitable, and again, well into seven-figure profits, and then you'd put in the gentleman MD who had been undermining you, and then all of a sudden, from your experience, you were fighting it, dealing with some challenges at home. Then your FD suddenly says, "Right, we've got a big hole in the company." Did you have a sense? Right, I was going to say, what caused that? Were you aware?
He was hell bent on growth, which is fine. I'm always hell bent on growth as well. But he was growing in the wrong things. He was taking on the wrong people. We took on a lot more. Actually, it was Pam that took on all these extra salespeople, believing we could fund it. And I allowed her to do it because it was hard to argue. This was before she completely stepped out. And we were chasing marketing all the time. We were spending more and more on marketing costs. And leads were going up. They went from sort of like £35 a lead to something like £150 a lead, and we couldn't get it back into control. I'm defending it because, obviously I'm helping run the marketing thing, but we couldn't find out what was going wrong. This email came around, it sort of knocked me for six a little bit, and at that point Pam said to me that she wanted a divorce, that she'd had enough of the fight with it all the time.
And this was last spring?
Yeah, it was end of February, start of March, and we were away for my birthday, so it was a bit of a crappy holiday, to be honest with you. I mean, it was the start of a real downwards turn for us, because we got back from there to a business that was suddenly in a difficult state. My wife insisted she wants a divorce, and almost not knowing where I was going to go. We got back, and she'd miraculously found a house that she wanted me to pay a deposit on, so I paid a deposit on a house for her.
Because she wanted to move out into that house?
Yep. She insisted that I phoned the solicitors to start the ball rolling, so I did all of these things. But she kept lashing out. Then there were accusations going around the offices that I was having an affair with one of the staff members, all sorts of like silly little things. And people almost lost faith in me as well in the business. No one knew what was real, what wasn't. And a lot of this I didn't know at the time. I knew about the accusations and things like that because everyone was talking about it. But a lot of things I was finding out from Pam. So that was a strange thing, So she pushed me to call the solicitor. We started losing, I think, 200 grand a month we were losing at one point. And the only reason we survived it really was because of one of Dan's things, which is to make sure you got enough cash in the business. And if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have got through. So, but we were bleeding 200 grand a month. I'm dealing with all this divorce stuff. She's accusing me of trying to fiddle the books. Whereas fortunately our children worked in the business, so they knew I wasn't trying to fiddle the books, but she wouldn't listen, she couldn't see the reason for it. So, and then Neil, as I found out later, was also telling her I was fiddling the books. So, I'm fighting hand, tooth and nail to try and figure out how to save the business, how to save a marriage, how to protect us from everything that's going on, and it just didn't work. In August last year, I decided I'd had enough. So I wrote a letter apologising to my family for everything that happened and for not succeeding and not being good enough. Wrote down what I wanted to happen with everything, if the company could be saved and what happens if it doesn't get saved. And I messaged my sister and said, there's some stuff on my email which you need to find tomorrow or next couple of days. It's called this, and it was basically my last wishes. And she thankfully held on to me. She phoned me up and begged me to go and see her, and I'm glad I did. I left hers with every intention of doing something different, but something in what she said to me that day held me on. She called Pam round. Pam came, and they both had Amy was quite nice. Pam was having a go at me about being selfish and all this sort of thing. But I looked at things and I thought, well, if I can get rid of Neil, he was costing me like 12 grand a month. Maybe if I get rid of Neil, that will help and I can start things back on track. So the next few days, I dismissed the MD and started to really put the things in place that could try and save the business. I mean, at this point, I thought the business was gone. I couldn't see how we could survive from 200 grand a month loss.
It doesn't matter how much cash. You've got to have some serious cash to be able to afford a burn of 200 grand a month.
Oh, we had some serious cash at that point, So I did all that. In that process, I offered Pam. We bought, as you remember, we bought a house, we bought several properties, we bought some commercial things, and as part of the divorce, I said to Pam, just take it all, everything we ever worked for, because I thought, at least her and the kids will be okay, and I got a business, I might be able to save it, but she believed because of that I was trying to con her, and that was the story she was telling everyone. And it was quite challenging. I mean, this whole time I'm still, September came and I'm still doing the school runs. I don't know if you remember, but it was always me that did the school runs in the morning. I took the kids to school after I got them all up, got them dressed, took them to school, picked them up from school because they didn't finish school till 5:30, so I'm quite lucky I get a full day. But I'd bring them home, do their tea, put them to bed, and that was just the norm in our house.
And this is your youngest three, right? What ages are they?
They are 11, 13 and 15.
Yeah.
So it was a strange sort of time, and I remember it was a Monday night. We'd had a big row, Pam and I again, and we'd sort of worked it out that night. Tuesday I spent the whole day with her, and we were talking about, I was buying another house to move into, and I bought it with her in mind, because she said what she was looking for. She'd already pulled out of the other house and lost me some money on that one, and I thought we were turning the corner. The Wednesday, She'd been out, she came home and we sat together on the sofa, hand in hand, went to bed in the same bed that night for a change, and just held each other in our arms all night, and it was really lovely. But when I sat the MD, she was furious, and that was a real challenge. That's what we'd argued about on the Monday night, why I got rid of him, because he was the be-all and end-all, all that sort of stuff. And I thought maybe we're at a turning point, that we're healing, that we can get through it. I was so wrong. I was juggling the collapse of a business, the 3 children, everything that she was going through without knowing it. It was like holding up a burning building with just your bare hands. I'd recovered myself a little bit, and I one day went home to pick my children up from school, and Pam had messaged me that morning. That morning she'd given us all a kiss, and told us all she loved us. I said I loved her too, and it felt like things. That day I was going to sign up. I was going to sign paperwork for the new house, and I didn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to. I went to pick the kids up from school, and Rio finishes about an hour before the other two, so I went to pick him up, and he didn't want to wait. Normally we'd sit and wait. So I picked him up, and we went back home, and on the way I went to Aldi's and bought 2 bags of shopping, and I drove to shopping Aldi's. I'd never done it before, and it cost me like 40 quid for 2 bags of shopping, which is half the price of Morrison's, so I was quite chuffed. And I walked in there, I started going, babe, you won't believe how much this just cost me, 2 bags of shopping. And there's no answer, so I said, she spent a lot of time in the garden, as I said. So I said, right, Rio, go and see if Mum's upstairs. I'll go and see if she's in the garden out back. And I did. I went in the back garden, couldn't see her there, but she'd left a packet of cigarettes on the side, so I had a sneaky fag, because Rio was upstairs going to fetch her. And as I walked back in, Rio came to me and I said, have you found her? He said, no. I said, oh, that's strange. And we were walking through my orangery. There's like a series of doors to the garage, and she just started painting the dining room. So I said, oh, maybe she's in the garage. So we started walking towards the garage through the we've got a bar and a gym sort of thing, which sounds posh, but walking through there, and I could see the garage door was open, so I shouted and there was no answer, and I don't know what possessed me, but I just said to Rio, just wait here. He's like, why? I said, I don't know, Mum isn't answering. And I walked into the garage and I found her. She'd hung herself. She made the decision to leave permanently, I suppose, and I don't think anything ever prepares you for that kind of sight. It certainly didn't prepare me. I think I must have screamed something or shouted something because Rio was like, what's happening? And I was like, nothing, just stay there. I was trying to phone the police. Where I live, there's no signal, so I couldn't even do that. I remember rushing Rio out of the house. I needed to go somewhere to phone 999. Rushed him out of the house. My other kids were by this time about to finish school. So I had to drive. I drove halfway into Wellington, got out the car, phoned 999, phoned my sister and a couple of other family members because I didn't know what I was going to go back to. I had to race to the school to get the other two kids and get them in the car. And as I got back in the car, Rio said, did you just say police? And I was like, no, I said please. And he said, oh, I thought you said police. He goes, I got me all scared. And it's horrible because you know you're lying to your children at this point. And I got them in the car and they're like, why are you rushing us? I said, because, and I thought, I've got to tell them something, And I said to the kids, I said, there's something I need to tell you. And they were like, oh, is it, are you not telling us now because you've agreed that you and Mummy will only talk about things when you're both together? And that was the moment I had to say, I turned them, oh my God, and just carry on driving home, stop the car, they had a bit of a cry. Got back to my house and I think there were 4 police cars and 2 ambulances. We got the kids around the side of the house in the back way where they wouldn't see anything. And obviously the police are doing all their investigations. They let me back in for a brief minute into where she was, and they'd found 2 notes that she'd left, which were largely an attack on me. Although I didn't see them at the time, I didn't see them till a week or 2 later because she'd made out all sorts of things about me being abusive and things like this. So they had to, I suppose, go and do checks to make sure. I had to give them my CCTV footage to prove it wasn't there. So that's quite a challenging time. You've got all this, you're battling, a company that's in ruins. Your wife's taken her life. Your kids are in bits. Not knowing what to, you don't. I don't think, I've put here, this is easy for me to read some of this, but grief doesn't come in waves, it crashes like a tidal surge, and it drags everything under with it, and that's really exactly what was going on. The house was empty, I had really bad anxiety, my chest was tight all the time, it was like walking through a fog. You don't know what to do, you don't know what to say, people are saying all sorts of things to you, you've got some people accusing you of doing it, some people supporting you, some people stuck in limbo, not knowing what to do. And I don't think anyone knows how to deal with that situation. I know I didn't, but I knew I had to just be a dad as much as I could do. Those 3 boys, they needed me. But I didn't feel like I had anything left to give. And I think as much as I've carried them through, they've also carried me. Because if I hadn't got them to fight that situation myself only a couple of weeks before, I think I'd be in a different place. I carried on doing the school runs, doing the dinners. I started cooking for them every night, which I did anyway, but making more of an effort with the food. And then they went to bed. We just sat in silence all the time. It was horrible. I held them when they cried. Sometimes, at first, I couldn't cry myself because you're almost numb. You're in shock. At that point, obviously, I couldn't run the business. So Ben, who was the FD, after I told you I'd sacked the MD, I asked Ben to step up. We had a sort of an idea of a plan for it, and in the midst of that grief and trauma, not only did he step up, the entire team did. It's tragic in some ways that it took that to really save the business, because the team rallied. They rallied for me. They fought to hold it all together. And I have to say that under Ben's leadership, not mine, because I wasn't there, and we built a good team of people, and while they'd lost their way, this brought them all back together. And it meant that we spent 3 months last year, September, obviously October, after the funeral. I didn't get involved at all, and then they asked me to start going to like a regular weekly meeting, which I did, but if I'm honest, my heart wasn't really in it. We made some really tough decisions on people And ironically, some of the people we let the MD go, as you know, we let the operations director go, and what we found was that we didn't even know what they were doing. You know, when you're trying to pick up the work afterwards, there was no evidence they were actually doing anything. So sometimes you think you're relying on people that just aren't doing any work at all. So it's sometimes probably good to sit down with them and actually go through what they're really doing. Their emails can be very revealing when you find there aren't any. But we had some really tough calls in those few months, but it meant that January this year we actually had our strongest quarter since COVID, which isn't down to me in any way, shape or form. It's down to, in part, what happened, but also down to the sheer determination of everyone to fight for what had always been a really strong business, and to really try and make a difference. So, I can't say I'm not grateful to the team, not just Ben, but to the whole team for really pulling forwards, or pulling out all the stops to make the changes that were needed. And there were some sacrifices within that, but ones that were necessary. And we let some people go that perhaps I wouldn't have liked to have let go, but really they were dead weight. And you realise when you do things like this that you're carrying a lot of stuff that, you're carrying a lot of people that you didn't need to carry, especially when they go and there's no difference afterwards. And that's been some strong learning curves there, not just for me but for the team as well, because I think it's made some of them stand up and realise that they've got to do their part, and everyone now plays their role in a way that is humbling. As I said, it's humbling for me, watching them just carry the business through. I've stepped back now completely. I go in once a week for a meeting, usually with a breakfast because I like my breakfasts, and we go through everything that's been going on. We've got new budgets in place for the whole year. We've got big strong cash flow forecast. We've got a really strong financial team, and it's made a transformative change. It's just a shame that it had to come out of real tragedy to get there. And I said before that I don't know how I'm still standing here, sitting. I really don't know how I survived the last 18 months, but I am still here. I'm still standing and I'm still showing up. I have to read this bit because I don't be able to say it otherwise. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: success will not protect you from pain, and pain doesn't mean that you're failing. It just means that you're feeling. We spend so much of our lives chasing happiness, chasing numbers, exits, homes, status, thinking that when we get there we'll be happy. And I think I'm testament to the fact that probably isn't true. Happiness doesn't live at a finishing line. It doesn't live in spreadsheets or in bank accounts. It lives in the quiet moments, in the strength to carry on when your world has collapsed, in love and in presence. It's showing up for your kids when your soul is in pieces, in a team that holds you when you can't breathe. I called this talk originally The Pursuit of Happiness. And if it is the pursuit of happiness, then it's bloody messy, it's brutal, but it's real. If you could take anything from me today, I hope it can be this: resilience isn't about being tough, it's about being tender and still standing afterwards. It's about breaking and choosing to rebuild. It's about living, really living, while you still have the chance. So, as I said, here I am, I'm still standing, not because I haven't fallen, because I have, but because I choose to keep rising up again, despite it all. And maybe that's what happiness really is. Not the finishing line, but the fact that we're still here and we still have time to enjoy it.
Bill for all.